Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Geek Productive YouTube channel. On today's feature, we have Carson Jones. Carson is the product at, he's a product manager. He's not the product. He's a product manager at Arcade. Arcade uses gamification to help teams connect, motivate, and perform better. Now, Carson, we first met, didn't we? What was it? Steph invited us to the Notion Worldwide. And
Correct.
yeah, and I was like, I really enjoyed your setup, and I thought it was a really good example of like how teams use Notion. And Carson's also a Notion pro as well, so he's got the expertise.
I appreciate you inviting me in today. It's a pleasure.
No, but it's really exciting. And maybe to start, you can tell us more about your work and Arcade as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll start there. At Arcade, we like to joke that we make fun of work. And so what we're focused around is creating happier employees, and we strongly believe that a happier employee is going to be more productive, and they're going to stay longer with their company. So as you mentioned, we use gamification to create contests around KPIs or anything that the company might be doing. And what that does is it creates engagement and competition and collaboration within mostly sales and service organizations. So
Brilliant. And how many are at the team at the moment at Arcade?
yeah, absolutely. So we are now at 12 full-time employees, plus or minus 2 or 3 contractors. One thing that's really interesting about us is we span both sides of the globe. So I'm sitting here in Dallas, Texas today, and we have about half our team here, mainly on the marketing and sales side, but our entire engineering team sits in Melbourne, Australia. Notion's been really key for us as we build a remote-first type culture, and I'll talk about a little bit of that today and how we use it across the globe.
Fantastic. Well, they're two great places for like a 24-hour business, isn't it?
I
You
feel like
pick
that's
up
the
where the
blessing and
others
the
left off.
curse. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. It's a blessing and the curse to, be able to work around the clock.
Mm.
To one degree, like if you can keep the engine running, it's very smooth sailing and you get a lot of excess productivity. But if something blocks and you have to wait for a full day, sometimes things can get
Yeah.
complicated. And for 2 years hurdles have been popping up, and we've been very fortunate to figure out the best way to work together across the seas.
Definitely, yeah. Well, it's really exciting. So, my first question is like in terms of like how you first discovered Notion. Like, when was that, and how did you sort of roll it out with your team when you discovered it?
Sure. So before joining Arcade, we'll go back a little bit. I helped build a marketing agency here in town focused around the medical space. And my mentor and CTO over there was a very brilliant technician, but at the same time, I learned a lot from him on how to build teams. And the quote that stands out in my mind is, you need to work yourself out of a job with everything that you do. And for the longest time, I was like, hey, what does that mean? And does that mean that I'm going to get fired or let go? But really what Ray was trying to push towards me was this concept of, if you can't hand over the work that you're doing to someone, you can't ever focus on new things that the business needs to achieve. So through that, Ray, this is a long-winded answer, but through that, Ray really pushed this tool called Confluence by Atlassian, and so much so where it got to a point where one Christmas he bought T-shirts for everyone within the company that said, "Let me wiki that for you." So rather than answering a question, he would send you a wiki link to where he had written down an answer to that question about how to do something, for instance. And so anyway, I think that it really ingrained in me this idea of communication or written first process design, and to digitize everything that an organization is doing just to help scale as you build a company. Anyway, fast forward, after leaving that company, I joined the Arcade team, and I was very fortunate with a few different things. The first is we were a pretty small team. The second is we didn't have anything in place to house our processes digitally, or where we were doing project management or task management, you name it. And at the exact same time, Notion launched on Product Hunt, which I'm an avid follower of. So it kind of, things just fell into place at one moment. And so we actually, as an organization, have been using Product Hunt for over 2 years now, which is really exciting to see how it's grown and how it works. But beneficially for us, it wasn't hard to drive adoption originally. And as we've grown and as we've scaled our organization, it's amazing how many times things have changed within our own Notion, and how many times we've blown things up and started over from scratch. But that's exactly what's beautiful about it. It's really easy to move information around. It's really great to reformat things as your own internal processes evolved. And as we've moved from 4 people to now 12, it's exciting to see how new things have taken shape.
Oh yeah, definitely. I think that's like a bit of serendipity there that you found it at the right time as well.
Right.
But like I think it's like nice to see that, like, because you've gone from like 4 to 12, and I think that's always like a critical point. Like it's quite a big move for the business because you're literally quadrupling and tripling in size,
Right.
and it's like trying to, like, obviously that's a huge stage for the business. So yeah, it'd be great to see how you've gone about sort of mapping your processes. um,
Absolutely.
I think that was something that I was really like took away from the last event that you were on, like how you internalized that. So yeah, feel free to sort of tour us around your Notion account.
Absolutely. I think what I really want to get into today is that there's an incredible amount of resources out there currently with how people use Notion personally. Marie Poulin is really pushing the envelope here, showcasing how she uses it to take notes or organize her second brain, like Tiago Forte. One thing that I really want to dive into is how a startup is using Notion, and how, we'll get messy, we'll roll our sleeves up a little bit together. I really want to show you like what it's like for a small team that's scrapping together a product that we're bringing to market, and how we think about Notion and how we use it across all functions of the company.
Yeah, I'm buzzing because like it's. I think as our team grows, I want to learn from like your team. So yeah, it'll be really exciting.
Great. Let me hit the share button here and we can go ahead and get started.
Awesome.
Okay, so I think the first thing to dive into is this concept of our principles, and like as we started to add more members of our team, as a leadership group, we try to put together some things that fundamentally put remote work first. Like I mentioned, we span across the ocean, and so through that, remote first work comes with its pros and cons, and to make it work, we have to adhere to a few different guidelines. And so these principles that I'll go over just now will kind of guide all of our thinking towards how we use our tools, but then also how we design our processes. The first is that you need to write it down. Communication between, over video or over phone or even over chat or like an instant messenger is insanely great for collaboration in the moment. But the minute someone's not there, i.e. they're working later that night, they're never going to be able to make or to like absorb themselves directly into the progress that you've made. So to keep the wheels turning, we operate under this principle that everything needs to be written down. Admittedly, we're not the best at doing this, but we try our best. The second is like, don't be afraid to blow anything up. As I've mentioned, as we've moved 2.5 years, grown from 4 to 12 people, we've also changed quite a bit as an organization. We started out primarily in retail. We've grown to several different industries. And through that, we've had to build new processes for all functions within our organization, whether that's customer support or, our design process before we go build a particular feature. And so, don't be afraid to blow anything up on your page. We make use of what we call a soft delete. We can maybe talk about that later, but mostly like, if it's not working, change it. And that's the beautiful part about Notion, in my opinion, is that it's incredibly flexible and it works. And this one comes actually from my dad, and this is a funny principle, but value never comes from checking a box. It's not about updating the spreadsheet. It's not about actually updating Notion. What really is important, and you should never lose sight of this, is the objective that you're trying to achieve. And remember that the work you do is not about how you do your work. It's about getting the work done. And so, as a productivity nerd, I like to talk about or think a lot about how optimizing my workflow, but in reality, that's just the purest form of procrastination. And so I try, not as hard as I can, not to ever lose sight of like actually getting done what I need to get done.
Yeah, definitely. Your dad's a
So
wise man.
enter into Arcade. So like I mentioned, as an organization, we've used it quite significantly across the different functions within the company. So here's a good list of some of the different things that we're looking at. We started as we scaled. The only function that we've unbundled away is the CRM management. I know a lot of teams specifically use it for sales CRM or marketing CRM. We've just grown a little bit too big for it to make sense. But besides that, we've kept most of the company across marketing, across success, across engineering and design centralized here. So we'll go through that today. I want to go quickly give some frame and context. So I think, a lot of our processes connect multiple different pages, multiple different databases, multiple different aspects of Notion. And even though some of your fans may be really familiar with how that works, I really definitely want to set the stage here for a second. So we'll dive and we'll start with our customer table. So we internally do our CRM for our current existing customers, and that drives a lot of what we do as an organization. And this fits in nicely with our mission. We're here to make for 1 million happy workers, and that starts with those workers. And so everything revolves around our customer table. As support requests come in and as new things that people are asking for, the product team then develops ideas, and ideas become releases that we push out back to our user base. And if we've done our job correctly, then that will help us expand and serve more customers. So let's dive into what that actually means. So we talked about starting with the customer table. We're going to dive into a variation of this, but I really wanted to, I built this in such a way that anyone could take a look at this and get a good sense of how a team might be working. So you'll notice that these aren't actually real customers, but this is very much a duplication of what we currently have as a table. A few things to point out with this. I mean, your viewers at this point should probably be familiar with the beautiful table feature inside this product, but we really try to make use of a few different things, and that is minimizing the amount of properties that we have on a table and not making it overwhelming for people coming to it. So you'll see here that we make use of emoji to represent status almost more than we use properties to. And as I show how the customers table connects to other aspects of the success team, it's a good glance to figure out, hey, who's an actual customer, like a green heart, versus who's a potential customer that might be trialing the product, versus who's a really big deal like a volcano, etc. So this gets really exciting. We make use of an extensive amount of different views, and so I think as a process owner, one of my jobs is setting up viewpoints around this central table for each of our individual employees. It would be very confusing if I had to traverse through all of these and I didn't know that that's what I needed to work on. So we try to filter these views on top of this set to make it useful for everybody. So a good example of this is we can filter out the view for just the trialing customers. One thing I wanted to point out is Notion does have a really good use of formula data, especially for looking at macro information. So this is a good example of at a glance seeing what's our opportunity value in terms of monthly recurring revenue for our current existing trialing customers. As a leadership group, we use this specific summary on our real customers table to get a good sense of how we've progressed each week, which is exciting. So when we think about customers, we think about connecting it to a few different things. And so I'm going to dive into that now. The first is in support requests. So while we're still waiting patiently for the API to open up, we actually use Zendesk for our support requests as they come in. And we use it primarily to connect requests that our support team or success team can't take care of themselves, and anything that might need technical assistance, a bug that might pop up, et cetera. And so they're transcribing diligently the ones that need our tech team's attention across the seas to actually go execute against. And so we move anything that needs action from other team members into Notion directly. And from this, we get a good, rich history of each of the customers, the success requests that they pick up. So at a glance, we can dictate, a volcano-based customer might regard more priority than a customer that's left us, unfortunately, or is about to leave us, if that makes sense. And so we try to anchor those emoji statuses across different tables to help us contextualize, okay, what's most important at this time. As an organization, Arcade, our product uses gamification to transform KPIs or business initiatives into contests within the application. But one of the ways that we do that is we also sit as an employee within the organization, and we personally run contests for our team. What that helps us do is it helps us test through different types of initiatives that customers want. And so we can almost prototype these concepts before we go build any product around it. And so from that, we've developed this concept of game management, if you will. And our success team uses a table within Notion to think about game management specifically. Notion actually just shared this on Twitter the other day. I wanted to actually point out here, again, with the formulas, you can make use of date differences to get a countdown on how many days before this game actually expires. So see in this first row, for instance, this cash collection contest for Lemon, it ends in 2 days. And so the owner of this is looking towards, Allison would be looking at, hey, how do I prepare wrapping and making the announcements, and more importantly, awarding the prizes for the people that have satisfied the objective of the game.
Yeah, definitely. I really like there, in that success, if you just go out of there, back to the success at Arcade, it's just simple 3 key areas. And I quite like that because it's very focused and very orientated towards, the end goal.
It's interesting to hear you point that out. You know, our space, like our real success space, and maybe we can take a peek at that in a second, is
Yeah.
definitely lots more stuff in there.
Oh,
We have
okay. Yeah.
guides and how tos, right? But you know, when you think of
Yeah.
like you think of like the core everyday things that you need to look at, we try to draw attention to that stuff across the
Mm.
space more importantly. So you know, this is just an example of how what that looks like.
Yeah. Fantastic.
As as we run prototypes of games that we're doing manually, or we get enough support requests from a common thread, that's when we kind of enter into the product space, and that's really where I operate within the business. So we'll take a look at, you know, as a product organization, how do we think about building the right things for our customers. I'll start with a caveat, and that's you know, we've recently thought about how we do this, and we've adopted this technique pioneered by the guys over at Basecamp. Specifically, Ryan Singer just released a book on this called Shape Up, and their philosophy on how they decide and bet on work to go do is something that really made sense for us as an organization. It was almost exactly what we were doing anyway. He just kind of gave us some of the words to describe it. So we'll start from that caveat just to make sense of what to do. There's a few different principles within shaping, and the main takeaways is that you don't estimate how long something would take. Instead, you set a standard or a circuit breaker how long you think you should work on it. So rather than looking at a project and going, well, you know, that could take 2 months, we say, how can we get it? How can we satisfy the need or the objective in a month and not spend any more time on that? And so what that, it reframes your thinking on how you allocate the resources you have as a team, and helps you pin down stuff that you know inherently that you're making a bet. You're making a true bet on, hey, this is something that our customers want, or this will help us acquire new customers. Anyway, so the best way to thinking about how we've translated the shape up idea or the principle is that we don't have a backlog. Instead, everything starts as a raw idea. And so we have an ideas board where we've jotted down notes around observed requirements or observed needs. And this comes from like interviews that we have with our customers. This comes from you know, any kind of support requests that we have. This comes from sales pitches that our sales team is doing. On a day-to-day basis, we're formulating new ideas on what we are capable to do. But rather than sticking that into a roadmap or into a backlog that can become incredibly messy or complex, we just leave it on the idea space. So we'll dive into like what that looks like for a second. So as you notice, like there's different and we're actually in the real product space here. So you're looking at a true product board here inside our organization. But so we outline things on a component basis. And so, you know, within each of these existing components within our application, like in our integration management tool, for instance, we know that there's some needs that we've observed, but these aren't really ready to be worked on. They're not tasks that have a solution towards them. They're not tasks that really we've outlined any technical requirements. They're just straight up, hey, this is something that we know we need to go build. And they might have some raw ideas, some raw prototypes. As things mature past the idea phase, we get into what we call pitches. And this is really a fundamental idea from the Shape Up book. Pitches is in preparation. You see here, actually, here's one of my teammates in here. Pitches is in preparation for getting that idea shaped into the solution that the team can then go execute against. And a pitch itself is broken down into a few different things. So we'll dive into one here. I'll give you an example. Arcade, as a gamification company, we look at game design almost as a big part of our inspiration. And so one of the problems that we have right now is this kind of things happen in Arcade, and there's not a good feedback loop attached to what's happening in Arcade. I might be awarded tokens from my manager, and I get a push notification about that. But when I log into Arcade, nothing happens. You know, I have to know to go to my profile. So we're developing through this concept of like, when I return to the application, can I present some kind of delightful summary to me to go over the things that happened? So anyway, this is a real pitch card that we're working through right now. And in a pitch, we go through the problem and outlining it in a sense where anyone within the organization can understand why that's important. We set the appetite. So as I mentioned, we don't estimate. Instead, we forward think and we go, how long should we spend on this? And a large appetite actually associates more with a month-long project. And then probably the most important principle, I think, in my opinion, out of Ryan Singer's book is that, you know, we design the solution as a product team. So me and a product designer and our CTO, we think through how to actually put a rough idea and some guardrails in place on how to actually satisfy that. So the engineering team can worry less about, figuring out what needs to be done and figure more about how to effectively get that into the product. We give our team a lot of autonomy in the final solution that they produce. And so we're not obsessing over, fine details in this regard, but instead we're looking at, okay, how can we point you in the right direction to satisfying this problem that we've now explained to you or we've talked about. So we'll go through here. This is a really good example. We have some fantasy football examples from our CEO. He's a big fantasy football player. But here, Yahoo Fantasy Football does a good job of this exact use case. And so this is where we'll stick stuff that, might act as inspiration or might act as research towards what we're doing. Anyway, I won't get into much more of the pitch, but the thought is when every quarter as a leadership team, we look through these pitches, we've looked through how much appetite we've associated with them, and we look through how many engineers that we have available for us, whether that's through Holiday or through, our teams on the bench, right? And we make bets on which pitches we want to go do. And so we start and actually decide, hey, these are the 8 pitches that we're comfortable with going about achieving. So we'll kind of get into that. So the next one that we'll look at is inside Sprouts. We now take those pitches that we're going to be worked on and we segment the task list out that the team needs to work on. So the engineering team doesn't ever actually work per se on the pitch side. They work more on the Sprout that's then connected to the pitch. And I'll show how we tag the relational database there. It's worth noting, I'm not really sure where I come up with these metaphors for what I call these pages, but Sprouts almost made sense to me because it's it's the seedling that becomes what the tree of the product. And then, but it also is it's a nice garnish on top of your sandwich. So Sprouts can also mean work that we just know needs to be done. So there's subsets on top of the Sprouts board, which is bugs that the engineers need to go take care of or tech debt that they know that they want to go stamp. And the CTO and I, as we plan what we need to go build for each quarter, we get a good mix of both new feature sets and then enhancements on existing stuff. And so we really try hard as an organization to balance that. Anyway, within the Sprouts table, you're looking at a set of different properties, but for the most part, this is a lot like the pitch, but again, it's more geared towards the progress. So I actually wanted to dive into that a little bit. I want to walk through a Sprout that's actually in testing and give you a good sense of how we use the card to communicate as an organization. So just give me 1 second. Let me identify which one we wanted here. I guess this is a really good example of how we connect the tables together. So as I mentioned, the Sprouts is a item on the relational data or on the pitches. So as we select things to be worked on, we're assigning Sprouts to it, right? But more importantly, we are inside the pitch itself. We're making use of the link card within the context of the card, so you can go and find the Sprout associated with it. So here's a task that one of our lead engineers is working on currently, which is enabling. We have a chess system, so think of a Pokies box or a spin wheel, right? We give out these things called chests. We give our end users an ability to win tokens or things within the arcade application, and they get chests for things that they do. What we found though was our customer success team was consistently pushing out these chests just as a means to drive their own engagement. Managers came to us and they're like, we really want to do this too. We want to be able to give these chests out for whatever reason. And so this is, it's a really articulated problem at that point for us to go and execute against. Anyway, I'm going to get down here into the feedback and the testing plan. So this is kind of the process that we've adapted. It's a little loose, there's no formal guidelines here, but I'll point out a few different tips that, we've picked up as a team collaborating together. The first is you'll notice things are buried in these toggle lists, and that's very intentional. I have this principle where you have to design your Notion page or any page that you're working on with your team through this lens of, if I'm looking at this for the first time, will I be overwhelmed? Do I know what needs my action? Do I know what needs my attention? If I'm looking at this for the 100th time, do I know what's changed? And do I know what I now need to focus with? And until Notion gets to a point where, the page updates and the differences are a little bit more improved, no fault on their behalf, but we've adopted this process instead to use toggle lists. Beyond that, we always operate under this principle that the most recent or new information will go as high up on the card or the section that it's related to. So feedback from today will be above feedback from last week, for instance. And that's just that's something that we've had to that way everyone has a good sense of, okay, what's the most recent stuff on this particular page. Inside of each toggle list, we make use of a few different things. The first is we use strike throughs to mention stale issues or things that we don't necessarily need to go tackle. And then we also make use of inline comments to have small conversations within each of the different feedbacks. So in this case, Chris is mentioning here that this is something he couldn't actually replicate, but he's going to dig into. Anyway, so that's pretty much how that process works. It's worth noting that when we go through a sprout, we choose to work on the different sprouts based off of sprints. So almost like in a traditional agile process, we assign a small amount of time and for the team to focus on particular ideas. So I think sprints really look at the sprouts that we're working on currently. It's called sprinters, by the way, because shout out to our engineering team in Australia. They're really into Aperol sprints, especially one of our lead engineers over there. And so when I was building this page, I'm like, we make fun of work too much to call it a sprint. Let's call it a sprinter. I think that guy's a little bubble to it, but maybe I'm making bad jokes here. Anyway, these are the different sprints that we have outlined here. And as we come through and decide what needs to be worked on, we're attaching those sprouts to this sprint document. This sprint document is mostly used by our CTO and myself just to get a good gauge on, hey, what's left to get done? Are we going to make it towards the deadline that we associated with it? And so you'll see here, we've included a linked database and then filtered that sprout, that view of the sprouts database to only focus on where the sprint was assigned. And so that contextually is really helpful to make use of that view specifically on this card. We use this a lot for our engineers will do the same thing, and they'll look at sprouts that are assigned to themselves. That way they don't have to worry about what the other ones are working on necessarily, and they can contextualize and be effective with their existing stuff. The other thing I want to mention here is you'll notice this last property associated with the sprout, and that's for the release. We're a web-based application, but we also compile down to iOS and Android. And so through that, we have to have very specific releases because we're pushing binaries to the Apple Store, we're pushing out an app update to the Android store. And so through that, we have to be very explicit in what's associated with each release of the application. And so the last part that I'll talk about here, we'll dive back to the goal is, what's actually going to go out the door. So we assign releases particularly to sprouts that will be associated with the app updates. And so as a release, so, it's either in progress or it's actually really completed, it's assigned the sprint that's kind of loosely associated with that release, but then it's also assigned, more importantly, the sprouts or the projects that are going into it. This is really great for me or for our now head of marketing to come back and go, hey, what do we need to go talk about? What should we brag about on our social media? What should we send an email to from our customer standpoint? So I'll kind of show you how we use that here for a second. We'll dive into an old sprint, an old release. And, we, at a glance, we have what's included specifically in that release. And these link to the specific sprout. So you can get a good sense of, hey, what was actually done and what was the final result. And then more importantly, we also use this as a team to prepare testing for the result. When we push a binary out, we're testing that internally on devices across the organization through our beta release. And so we're now putting contextually things specifically related to the release that are on this card. So we make use of checklists or inline discussions that are geared towards the release specifically. So I think that covers kind of the realm of everything that we use Arcade for. I pretty much have rambled at this point. I will always continue to do that. Did you have any questions specifically, or was there a process that you wanted to dive into?
That was awesome. I think the way that you've structured it is really well thought through. But one of the things that I may have a question about is it's more for those teams that say were your sort of size, maybe 4 at the start, and obviously grew pretty rapidly. How much time did this take to put together and sit down and make those individual steps? Because I feel like someone at home this is an amazing setup. I feel like someone at home might be going, how do I get there in being able to formalize this process? Did you have a sit down meeting That was too many questions fired at you.
Yeah, no, that's fine. It's a really interesting question to ask. So like I mentioned, one of our core principles is to blow it up. This specific space, the product space within our Notion, has changed about 12 times. And maybe I'm a little neurotic, and maybe I'm a little obsessive over how to best optimize that. But fundamentally, it's consistent with what we started with. So back before, when we first started using Notion, tables didn't exist. And we used columns with pages to indicate progress around projects that needed to be done. We had a column for to do, we had a column for doing, and we had a column for done. And within each of those were just pages that described what needed to be asked. And then they introduced tables. I was like, great, let's add it all into a roadmap. So we dragged those pages specifically into the table. And then now associated rather than the column, we just added a property on the table. So what I'd say is, like, don't ever try to design the whole thing right away. And I don't think you're going to get it right, especially if you try to go after everything that's involved, like from end to end. Instead, just start writing it down on a page. As you start to see commonalities between different pages that you write, or themes within existing bits, or areas within the page that don't really make sense to sit together, that's when you can think about introducing a table, or introducing another table and connecting it to that other one, right? And so, while our process itself, doesn't really have a discrete, hey, we've spent X amount of hours on, it's an ongoing thing. It's not something that we're very formal about here at Arcade either. It's someone will make a change to it. And if you make a change to it, it's your responsibility to communicate that backwards to everybody. And if someone doesn't like it, they're encouraged to talk up. If someone doesn't like it, they're particularly encouraged to stop, right? Or to change, or to change it back, or to propose a new solution. And so, we're very lucky to have a team of thinkers that are trying to optimize for everyone else, and that's been really helpful as we've scaled this as an organization.
Definitely. And I quite like the way that you've paid more attention to the different views for departments, because I think that's what some companies can do, is they get carried away with a tool and only focus it on that department. But you've included and made it fairly easy for each department to just walk in and be like, I know what I'm doing, just through those different,
We definitely, like I mentioned, we definitely try to frame context. And so maybe that's a good segue into, some takeaway items that any team adopting Notion can adhere to. We'll go through each of these really quickly, and then I actually need to wrap up here in just a bit. Like I mentioned, it's time to make a table. I mean, that's the most powerful feature in Notion, is building things around as a relational database. And I get really excited about this. I tweet about this quite a bit. That's Notion's bread and butter. Always organize each page as if there's someone's viewing it for the first time, and try to make use of any technique or tooling within Notion to contextualize it for those folks. So what's most important? Using callouts, using colors, using what I'm showing here, which is code blocks, to kind of draw people's attention to the stuff that's most important, that needs their action. Toggle lists are your best friend. As you start to take notes and you jot around in your mind mapping, collapse those things into a toggle. And that kind of fits back into that principle I just mentioned. Never, ever duplicate data, especially when you're working on tasks lists. You never want to have that same item across multiple pages. And so we make heavy use of all the variations of links inside Notion, and that's been huge for us. When you are designing a table, we like to adhere to this idea of minimizing the amount of properties that you have on a table. And on that same regard, when you've figured out the properties that you need, the database owner should lock that database. And there's a way to do that inside Notion. And that's just so no one accidentally uses or adds an additional property. Again, this all fits back into context. More properties means more confusion, especially for someone looking at it first time. It's like, what do all these statuses mean? Don't worry about that, right? New information should always go at the top. It's a big principle of us. We make a big use of any resolve button. So as you have a conversation within the page and you're sending that out, if you need to come in and have a new conversation, or if you have a new question to ask, resolve the previous conversation, even if it's not finished. That way, again, it comes back to context. Like, what still needed to be asked here? What still needed to be done? And as we're working around the clock, we have to make a clear segmentation around those kind of lines. The last two that I'll talk about is if you're ever trying to tag a date, hit at today, and this date will dynamically update across the page. You can also do this for the page title, which is really neat. something I forgot about. So we come look at this in a week. It will say, hey, takeaway tips last Tuesday. And so what that does is it frames context for anybody. The last is to buy into emojis. There's, as an organization, we're carried more towards the millennial workforce. So by nature, we speak emoji all the time. But more importantly, like emojis are gimmicky and whimsical, but they're an incredible display of like a lot of information. And so make use of them, be consistent with them, assign your icons as them. And especially as I talked about with the customer table specifically, they're really good for showing status, even as you connect tables together.
Oh, definitely. Well, those were some really, really good tips. And Carson, thank you so much for taking your time out to dive into your Notion, because I think like it was really useful for everyone who is in that sort of difficulty position in a team that may be looking to actually formalize the way they're using Notion. So everyone go follow Carson on social media. You're at Carson Jonze, right?
Yeah, like Spike Jones, I think he spells his name like
Jones.
that. Yeah. And Jones was already taken. I'm very blessed to have a common name, so it's been really tough for me to get URLs and usernames. So yeah, come follow me. You can also reach out to me. I'm Carson@workplacearcade.com. Any tips or any help you need, I'd be happy to help. As you can tell, I'm pretty passionate about how to organize things, but more importantly, I'm pretty passionate about people doing work that they love and not being frustrated with when they do that work. So.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. Thank you so much, mate, for coming on. We'll catch up soon, yeah?
Francesco, thank you so much.
Yeah, cheers, Carson.